Now, it's always a great, great pleasure for me, and he gets mad as heck at me when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyhow, to introduce maybe one of the top business school deans in the world. He'll catch me later and say, if you say that again next year, I'm going to fire you, but he's not going to do it. This guy built this school from just a business school to a great business school. The faculty of this building, we didn't have this building, and he came in like a breath of fresh air several years ago, and it just built this into a great business school, a great faculty, and I'm not going to say any more because Dean Percool, talk about your place here. All right.
Thank you. Jim is extra kind. Thank you for that great introduction. I just wanted, every year I want to make sure that I come to this event and I welcome you. Now, we have many events and I don't show the same type of interest in every event. This one is special because I'm an engineer. So I was introduced to project management as a young 17, 18-year-old and loved it, and got a degree in industrial engineering and operations research, and I have used the skills I have learned in my undergraduate program throughout my life. And the skills that I have learned in project management particularly have been very, very helpful to me. And I literally look at things as projects, and I give myself deadlines. I look at it and find the critical path. Mind you, I don't have the fancy tools that you guys use these days, but I still have it up here, and I can still do a mean CPM per chart and all that. So, you know, this is 1970s, folks. So this is quite a few years ago. But nevertheless, so I have a soft spot for project management, and I want to welcome all of you to our campus. I see there are friends, alumni, students among you, ex-students, staff. I want to thank all of you for your support over the years. Jim said, I built this place. Well, I was here while the place is being built. I've been here now 17 years as a dean, and I've seen this school grow from a little tiny university and little tiny school to a world-class institution. Our school this fall will have approximately 7,000 students in the School of Business, okay? And that is, however you look at it, is a large school. We will have 3,500 plus master's students. Half of them will be from the other end of the world. So, you know, this is a place that has changed dramatically over the years. U.S. News and World Report ranks our MBA program number 37, our evening MBA program number 34, our online programs number 9 in the United States. So I think that recognition has come along with hard work. Now, I will not take credit for any of this, but I will take credit for one thing. Now, see the seats you are sitting in? I take credit for those because when we designed this building, we have an auditorium, university auditorium. Every time I go there, today I'm going to go there, we have doctoral hooding. I can't sit in those seats. They are small and they are very close to each other. My knee always touches. And when we were building this, I said, look, bring me the chairs. They brought me the chairs. I sat down, I crossed my legs. I said, this is the spacing I want, and this is the chair I want. So you will have a comfortable day because of me. I'll take credit. Anyway, you did not come here to listen to me. I just wanted to welcome you. I appreciate all of you being here and supporting us and participating in this event. So you are here to listen to a great program, to follow a great program. So without further ado, I will say bye-bye and wish you a great event. Thank you. And this guy brought project management to our school. So.
He did, and he was very supportive. This guy, you go to him with an idea, and if it just makes a little bit of sense, he said, well, go try it. And that's one thing is that attitude of the dean has helped make this a great school, a great business school. And it was a pleasure to be here. I still teach part-time and do this and a few odds and ends here and there. So, a couple of things. I was told our keynote is here. Okay, Debbie said yes. But we have Larry Johnson. Where'd he go? Right here. Okay. He's president of the local PMI chapter. They're co-sponsors. David Pells is sitting. There he is. Yep. And then Susan Kennedy, are you here? See, some people, you know, anytime you organize something like this, there are a lot of people that contribute. But there's usually a few that just can't stand back and they just pick things up and go with them. And Susan Kennedy from PMI local chapter was one of those. Teresa here, Diaz, she's from our thing. And last but not least, Debbie Samak over here leaning against the wall, holding the wall up. But these are three people who just really contribute to this a tremendous amount and deserve a big round of applause. Those of us who get up here and get all the glory and, get the pictures taken and what have you, but we don't do much work. They do all the work, and we just kind of step forward and say, okay, hey, here we are. Okay. Is Russell here? Is Zapalac? Oh, okay. Hey, come up here, boy. Come here. We were worried about you, Russell. What you call it? Just in time. So
that's what it's all about, right? Just-in-time delivery?
That's right. Well, working for transportation, TXDOT, you better be on time, right? You don't want a bad reputation. Okay, but TXDOT, of course, Russell has been with them a number of years, and they're going to tell us about all the grand and glorious things going on there. Okay?
Just a few of them.
Just a few of them. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Which button is it?
That's forward.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. The good news is I didn't have to drive through any TXDOT construction sites on the way here this morning, so we actually made great time. So, and that in Southwest, we did have a little bit of a snafu, and I actually thought I wasn't speaking until a little bit later, but we made it, and hopefully we'll pass on a little bit of information about some of our projects, and I want to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A, so kind of store up your questions, and we'll talk a little bit about how we deliver projects here in Texas. Thought I'd touch on 4 basic topics today. First, current transportation challenges that we have. Talk about public-private partnerships, which is how we're delivering all of our major projects at this point in time, for the most part. There's always those exceptions out there. The advantages of P3, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So with that, one of the things I wanted to point out is we have got the largest transportation system in the nation. Basically, we manage almost 195,000 lane miles of roadway. Now, that's a big number. I can't get my arms around it. So if you build an 8-lane facility all the way around the equator, that would be 191,000 miles, I believe. So think about that. We maintain an 8-lane facility that goes all the way around the world. As far as bridges, we have 52,000 bridges that we maintain in this state that we're responsible for. If you stack those in a 2-lane configuration, what that would do is that would go from San Francisco to Boston, Massachusetts, end to end. It's a huge number of bridges. And when you think about the right-of-way that we maintain, more than 1 million acres, get an idea of that. That's 2 states of Rhode Island. That's the area of 2 states of Rhode Island, or 1 Delaware. Take your pick. So we have a pretty daunting challenge. If you look at the price of our facilities, from an asset management standpoint, discounting right-of-way, the roadway value out there is about $500 billion. To maintain that, we traditionally let, through a low bid process, about 1,200 construction projects a year that total somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 billion of construction a year. So that's kind of where we are. As most of you will know, we're fighting a losing battle, and part of that is mainly because of our traditional funding sources are drying up. How many people in here have a car that gets 26 miles a gallon? Probably 30–40%. You're paying less than $5 a month, assuming you drive about 12,000 miles a year, less than $5 a month for maintenance for state based on state gas tax for maintenance of those facilities. That's the majority of where our funds come from. Now, probably some of you came in this morning on a toll road, and you may have paid more than $5 just to ride on that toll road this morning. But you know, when you think about it, the gas tax, which everybody talks about as our major source of funding, is really, well, for lack of a better term, it's pretty dang reasonable. I mean, you know, where else could you get that type of transportation system for $5 a month? If you have one of those older vehicles like me that gets 16 miles a gallon, still, I'm paying less than $10 a month for that. So, but what we see, vehicles are obviously becoming more fuel efficient. So more and more, we're seeing our revenue shrinking. Since the gas tax has not been changed or not been increased since 1991, basically, today it has less than half the buying power that it had in 1991. So if we could do $1 billion program with that money in 1991, today we can only do about a $500 million program. So, you know, we're really kind of being hamstrung by the gas tax. But that doesn't stop. We've got a great economy. I don't think, 1,000 people a day are moving to Texas. So more people, and last time I checked, they weren't bringing their roads with them. So the other thing, just looking out, we've got an aging infrastructure problem. Most of the facilities that you guys are driving on right now are probably older than you guys. Y'all look pretty young. So they're probably much older than you. Going back and looking at population, which is that middle graph there. Since 1985, you can see the growth in population. We've had 100% plus growth in population. Well, because people are actually driving further because they're having to move further out to get to their jobs, so the vehicle miles that they actually drive, the time they spend on the road, is actually increasing considerably. But the amount of roads down there at the bottom line, it hasn't changed very much and probably won't. What that means to most people is that since 1985, congestion has increased. Your delay out on the roadway has increased 44%. So, and what that really means is the citizens of Texas are spending an extra 472 million hours sitting in traffic per year. And we're wasting $10 billion in fuel cost, vehicle repair cost, and delay cost. 10 billion, it's a huge number. That is our entire one-year budget, and we're wasting that out there right now on the highways. The scary part is by 2035, we're going to add another 5 billion new residents. That is, we're going to add along the triangle from Houston to Dallas to Austin, San Antonio. In that region, we're going to add another city the size of Houston by 2035. Think about that for all the infrastructure, not just roads. Where are we going to get the water? Where are we going to get the schools, the health care, all of those things by 2035. So transportation's just a little piece of it. Of course, I think it's the most important. But one thing we're also going to see is stop-and-go traffic on our roadways. In 2008, it ran about 30% of the time we were seeing our facilities under stop-and-go roadway. By 2035, if I added those numbers right, 47% of the time we will be in stop-and-go traffic, assuming we continue to just hold steady at where we are right now. We talked about aging infrastructure. If you can see, most of our highways, our major facilities in Texas, were built between 1947 and 1977. So what we've seen is in that 30-year period, the majority of our roads were built. Since 1993, we really have not added any new capacity to our roads as far as new facilities, new lane miles. We've been pretty much a status quo. And as I indicated earlier, 85% of our highways, 85% of the roads that you guys drive on a daily basis are more than 35 years old. And frankly, they're starting to crumble. We're starting to get into more and more reconstruction. Of those 1,200 projects that I spoke of earlier, roughly 70% are just rebuilding what we actually have out there at this point in time. To get to 2035, just to maintain our current levels of congestion, we're going to have to invest $370 billion. As I said, we let $4 to $5 billion a year presently. That means we need about an extra $3 billion of projects just for mobility improvements. In addition to that, in 2009, pretty much all our budget was starting to go towards maintenance. We cut our budget our maintenance budgets by $500 million just to have the ability to rebuild some of these projects that were really starting to suffer. And you can see the way we did that was, instead of overlaying, we delayed our overlays on our projects, and we started doing a lot more crack sealing, which is kind of the picture you see up there with all the joint sealing. We went from mowing the grass 4 times a year on the right-of-way and picking up litter 4 times a year to 3 times a year, or 2 times a year, depending. So we've been cutting back on our maintenance, but right now we're running about $1 billion behind. If you look at that $500 billion asset out there, we need to be spending an extra $1 billion a year to maintain it. I think even if we had that $4 billion, the 3 plus 1 a year, I think most of the people in this room realize that you don't just turn the spigot. We have to go through a pretty detailed process typically to crank a project out. After we identify funding, got to get through the environmental studies. We design the project. We found out that we start acquiring right-of-way. And then we find out that for whatever reason, that's taken a number of years. We've got to go back sometimes and start over again. and just do the environmental. Typically, it takes 15 to 20 years for us to get a project through the factory, if you will. And that's a huge number. I mean, that's most of our careers. We got to figure out a way to do that better. So what we're doing is we're using public-private partnerships to accelerate that. What we have typically found is that when we team up with the public, when we team up with the private, excuse me, we're able to accelerate the delivery of transportation projects. How much? Well, typically we're able to cut that in about half. I mean, so when you look at 7 to 10 years, that's still a lot of time, guys, but it's better than 15 to 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about public-private partnerships. P3s. In Texas, we have to be different, so we call them Comprehensive Development Agreements, CDAs. But there are 3 basic types of P3 projects. The first is a design-build project. Design-build project is simply what it says. We hire a contractor that is responsible for designing and building the project from the get-go. TXDOT still does all the financing, the maintenance, and handles the operations of that facility. The other process that we used is a revenue-based concession project. This is modeled after a European process, and basically we lease out the facility, if you will, for a number of years. Most of these run about 50 years. And we have a contractor that designs, builds, finances it, operates, and maintains the project. And that contract is purely based on user fees, be it tolls or be it ridership on a transit project, or maybe it's some type of taxing district that encompasses the project that's going to pay fees. But that project is kind of an off-the-books project, if you will, from our perspective. The other type of project, availability payments, we're not legally allowed to do an availability payment, but what you see, those are very similar to the concession project, except we guarantee that the contractor is going to get, or the developer is going to get, a certain amount of money. So we're basically taking the revenue risk off the table.
So why can't you do those?
Legislatively, we're not allowed to do that.
Just in Texas?
Just in Texas. Special Texas thing. Actually, availability payments are the model that's being used throughout pretty much the rest of the country. We started our program, everybody was using the revenue, or the pure, what we'll call a pure concession contract. And what we found is the Europeans love it, so i.e. we get a lot of bad press about the Spanish are coming, or the South Americans are coming, the Argentinians are here, the Australians are coming. But the U.S. contractors really prefer the availability payment model. So that's what most states are using. Other states that use P3s, Florida, Virginia, and Utah are the big states other than Texas that use the P3 model. So let's talk about the Texas model. I said earlier that we tend to use traditional design, bid, build projects for most of our normal projects. And over the last, basically, 7, 8 years, we've really moved towards, on our larger projects, on our mega projects, if you will, going to a P3 type model. Right now, we currently have about $23 billion in active P3 models, or active P3 projects. It's more than any other state in the union. We're running right now design and construction of $11 billion in projects. That's a total of 9 projects. 3 of them are actually right here in the DFW area, and you guys probably drive on them quite a bit. The connector project, the NTE project over in Fort Worth, and the LBJ project. Of those 3 projects, by the way, all 3 of them are going to finish early. Some of them between 6 and 11 months early. And all 3 of those projects are going to finish within the next 12 months. And actually, I think we're going to do the substantial completion ceremony next week on the connector project. So that one will be pretty much open and done by the end of next week.
So where is that? What's the connector project?
The connector project is the project on the north side of the airport. 114, 121. So,
Been there a couple times.
you've probably been in traffic or been lost in traffic there a couple of times.
I really like the lane switch.
Yeah. Well, you know, we like to keep our drivers entertained and keep them guessing. Right now, we're presently in active procurements on 7 new projects, or 7 additional projects worth about $7 billion. Probably right after the first of the year, we'll start procurements on another 2 or 3 projects that total up to about $2 billion. As far as operations go, we're currently have about $3 billion of these projects under operation at this point. The first one, the first pure concession one was design build and one was actually a pure concession. The first pure concession project went under or opened up to the traffic in last November down in Central Texas, the 130 project, and has been doing great. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. So, but the really cool thing about these P3 projects is that the state has only invested, of that gas tax money we talked about earlier, for that $23 billion, we're only putting about $6 billion into it. The rest of that money is coming from either developer equity, and the developers putting their dollars into it, them providing their own financing, or it's coming from what we call non-recourse revenue bonds, which is typically, we'll go out and sell bonds based on what we think user fees will be on a project based on the merits of that project. And they don't tie back to the state. So the state, if for whatever reason the users don't show up on the project, the fees aren't there, none of that goes back to the state treasury, to what we call Fund 6. It's purely looks at that project as its own project. So just recently, we sold, and a great example of non-recourse revenue bonds is actually the last week in July. So a couple of weeks ago, we sold $2.92 billion worth of bonds to finance the construction of Grand Parkway. That was the largest bond sale in the U.S. since 2011. The really cool thing out of that was we were able to take that 2.9 and we were able to roll out $750 million of that project to be used for other projects in the area. So we spun off seed money for the next round of P3 projects in the Houston area with that financing. So it's going to make a number of other projects possible. So why do we like P3s? Well, we've talked a little bit about accelerated implementation. But there's really 2 components to that. First off, because of the leveraging effect, which is, I guess, probably kind of the second item, we're able to bring those projects forward. If we would have had to wait for pay-as-you-go type money on those projects, we could have been waiting 10 years, 15 years, until we kind of collected enough money to do them traditionally. With the P3 program, what we're allowed to do is, through that leveraging of project dollars, we're actually allowed to bring that forward. And because we're getting a 4-to-1 leverage factor, or 1 to 4, however you look at it, we're able to take those dollars and prioritize those dollars, because anytime you tell my commissioners that, gee, we can get a $4 billion worth of work for $1 billion, they get pretty excited. So, they whether you want to believe it or not, those projects often get a priority. So we often accelerate them. Also, during the design-build process, in our traditional process, we do design, we finish design, and then we start a bid process, and then we go out to construction. On a design-bid process, we scrunch it all together and do the design and construction concurrently, which ultimately, on these big projects, could save us a couple of extra years. And as much as I don't like to admit it, you know, some of these foreign outfits that come in, teaming with a lot of the local contractors, they bring a lot of good ideas, things that we don't typically do in Texas. And although we do a lot and we pride ourselves with being very innovative, a lot of times they can show us some new tricks. So, and then if you talk to a lot of people, probably one of the big things about using P3 is the risk transfer. And when we look at risk transfer, what we're really looking at is comparing it back to our design bid build projects. On a design bid build project, pretty much TXDOT retains the risk for almost everything, with exception of a little bit of the construction. But if the design doesn't work or if the design is poor, basically we end up writing lots of change orders to the contractor. On the construction side, you know, the contractors get breaks for things like different site conditions, hazardous material. You know, if the right-of-way is not provided in a timely manner or the utilities aren't moved in a timely manner, we get dinged for that. That's all at our risk. And then obviously, as soon as the construction is done, they say, here it is, we're out of here. And we've got to maintain that project and operate that project for years to come. On a design-build project, what typically we see is they're responsible for the design. So on a traditional project, we run 4 to 8% in contract change orders. On a design-build project, we run something less than 0.05. Usually it's closer to 0.2% for our change orders of the construction cost. Huge difference. On the construction aspects, well, you know, I said in traditional, we were still responsible even on a traditional contract for different site conditions. All of those risks flowed to the contractor. The utility risk, the hazmat material for the most part, they all pretty much flow back across the line over to the developer on a design-build contract. But we're still responsible at the end of the day, when the contractor finishes that project, we're still responsible for operating it. We still have to come up with the money to finance it. We have to finance any change orders. And sometimes those design-build projects are tolled, sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's a revenue stream. So we obviously retain responsibility for that. But when you get into the concession-type projects, all of those risks, for the most part, are transferred over. Even the financing risk. If the contractor hits a problem, then they have to come up with the money to change it. Great example, on SH 130 down in Central Texas, the drought was taking its toll on the roadway, and the contractor had to redo most of a 40-mile facility. They had to redo almost 20 miles of paving. If it would have been our project, we would have had to pay for all of that. But as a concession project, they paid for all of that reconstruction. I think they paid like an extra 20 or 30 million. They never told us, and we really didn't care because they were responsible for delivering that project. So it was a huge success, and as you know, we opened that project. It's got a great ride. It's literally the fastest project in the U.S. The speed limit on it's 85 miles an hour. So we've been extremely pleased with that one. talk a little bit about how we procure these big contracts. We use a two-step process. Most of you are probably familiar with that. We request qualifications, and I will compare our procurement process to a courtship. You know, the way these processes work really well is when you sit down and you get to know your proposers. So we'll start off with our calls packages, and we'll sit down and have industry forums. We'll sit down and do one-on-ones with firms that requested, and just talk through our thoughts on the project. Really, it's more of a dating process. We're getting to know them. At some point, we shortlist down to typically 4 or 5 projects, and what we end up doing then is that's when the heavy dating begins. We go into confidential meetings, one-on-one discussions individually with each of the proposers. They tell us their thoughts, what they're thinking of doing, innovative ideas that they're thinking of bringing, and we'd say, ooh, that sounds interesting, or, well, that'll never fly. But we establish that relationship with that team. When they ultimately submit their proposal, it's a two-part proposal. A financial proposal, which gives their price, and a technical proposal, which says how they're going to actually deliver the project. We evaluate them separately, separate teams, so if I'm looking at the financial proposal, I don't have any idea what they propose technically. I'm just looking at numbers. The teams never get to talk until right at the end of the process, and then only their chairmen get to talk. The type of projects that we typically, or the methodology we typically do is, as with any project, we can provide a scope and say, give us your best price on this scope, as well as best price and schedule. Or, what we've been doing quite a bit, we did it on the I-35E project just up the road from here. We said, hey guys, we only got $1.1 billion. What can you build? And here's what we'd like to see you build. And so what they did was they gave us as much as they could build for $1.1 billion, plus a little bit extra that we thought we might be able to add if additional funds became available. The other thing that we typically do on all our contracts is an A plus B scenario where we introduce schedule into it. We value the schedule at a certain, we provide a certain day value, if you will, which, you know, like on the connector project, we're pumping 350,000 people a day through that corridor. Well, the value of delay and the value of impact to those people going through that corridor, pretty significant. And we try to quantify that and come up with a price. I don't remember exactly what it was, but usually it's kind of like $100,000 a day or something. It's pretty significant. And then the way A plus B works is if a proposer A was to propose a higher price and a shorter schedule, well, we'll take that delta of days. If they were proposed 60 days less, we'll multiply their schedule, or multiply the value of those days by the delta of the shortest schedule, and add that number to every other proposer. So even if another proposer comes in at a slightly lower bid, but they had longer days, there's a good chance we might award the project to the slightly higher cost because it had a shorter schedule. So, and that's what we call a best value selection process. So we're not necessarily looking at low bid. We're looking at what's the best value for the citizens of Texas, for the people who are actually going to be in that corridor. So, talk a little bit about some lessons learned. You know, just like when you're dating your future spouse, and you got to remember some of these concession deals are 50-year deals, so it truly is a marriage. confidentiality is pretty important. And you really want to think that through because they're going to come in with ideas. And you don't, if they come in with a better mousetrap, you can't let the mousetrap slip out so all the other proposers know what it is. That's not how the system works. So you know, everybody who works on these procurements actually signs confidentiality agreements, and if you know, on penalty of death or expellment or whatever. But I mean, it's pretty significant. You know, the other thing we do is the industry tracks these projects very closely. They know exactly what we have in the pipeline. Their first question is it going to be an availability payment? Well, no, you can't. We can't do that. Well, what do you know? What's the delivery methodology going to look like for this project? Design, build, revenue concession, or something in between? So, because they'll set up their teams completely different for each one. So we have to determine our methodology for that project, how we're going to deliver that project very early. The other reason we want to do that is because if we're going to use one of these processes, we'll provide different information. We don't want to over-design it. Actually, if we start over-designing, what ends up happening is we start bracketing the amount of innovation. So the less we give them, the more of an open or clean slate they have. It's amazing what they can come up with when they start designing things. But if we give them a design and they say, this is what this project ought to look like, well, that's what we're going to get back, guys. So we try not to over-design. We try to provide them just raw information. Well, here's what the dirt looks like. Here's the geotechnical information. But no conclusions. We don't tell them it's good, it's bad, or anything else. Here's how much water is going to have to go through that pipe, but we don't tell them what the pipe looks like. So the other thing that we've used, traditionally, we use a prescriptive spec, very detailed. Your concrete shall include these items, and it shall, this type of rock, this type of specification on the rock, this size of the rock, all those things. What we've done in these projects is we go to performance base. We really don't care about what the color of the rock is. But what we do care is how long that rock is going to last and how long that concrete is going to last. So we've gone to more performance-based. The other thing that we really found that's quite effective is the use of alternate technical concepts. We call them ATCs for short. What those concepts are, it's kind of like, you know, when we're going through that dating process, they have the ability to submit ideas. You know, if we took and moved this ramp over to here or flipped this intersection around, we could save $1 million. Is that something you can do? Well, moving the ramp, we may be able to say, sure, it sounds great. Flipping an interchange around, you know, we like the ideal, we love the ideal, but, you know, there's some local cities that they may not like it if we run the feeder street over instead of under. So we may have to conditionally approve those, which always leaves the proposer in a quandary. And what we hadn't figured out how to do is typically, if we go to a city and say, hey guys, do you mind if we flip this interchange? We can save a bunch of money by doing that, and we'll share part of the money with you. What they typically do, just because cities kind of have to do that, is, well, let's go ask the mayor if he's okay with that, and let's go ask the councilman district that sets in, and before long, that confidentiality item that we talked about is out the window, because now they're talking about it in public, trying to figure out if they can do it. One of the other things that we've done quite a bit of is allowing alternatives in the proposal. In other words, when we do one of these projects, typically we'll say, if you want to bid a different type of project, a different type of facility, if you want to use concrete or steel instead of concrete, or vice versa, we'll allow that. So we allow them the flexibility of coming up with and submitting different alternatives and award them. The other thing that we've learned is, we typically have 3 to 4 proposers. All of them submit great ideas, a lot of innovation. Well, we're only going to select one of them. So what do we do with all those other ideas? We try to bring them in post-award and take the ideas. And typically we pay a stipend, which gives us access, ownership, whatever you want to call it, to all of those ideas. So we'll pay on a $1 billion contract. Typically, we'll pay about $2 million in stipend. Now they'll spend a lot more preparing their proposal. Typically, on a $1 billion contract, to prepare one of these proposals cost a developer somewhere between $6 and $10 million. So they're not for the faint of heart. We've also, one of the problems when we started doing these projects is we're TXDOT, we don't do it like that. We had to change the culture of TXDOT. We had to do a paradigm shift to allow innovation to happen and to be able to capture that. The first couple projects we did is, they want to change the pavement design. We don't change pavement design. We want what we want. We want concrete out there. We want it to be a minimum of 14 inches. So we had to go through a process with everybody on the project. And right now we do a 2-day training project. A half day for the procurement side and a day and a half for the actual implementation side. But if you're going to work on one of our projects, be it one of our consultants or our staff, we're going to take you through this process, this training process. And actually, it's gone over so well, now we have the contractors wanting us to include them in the process well, which is great, part of partnering. What we find typically on these projects when we implement them, the first 6 months are pretty rocky. Because although we may think we've got a marriage in heaven, it actually turns out to be more of a shotgun marriage for everybody below us. So we're out there working, and we're trying to get the project manager, the task managers, the people who are actually working on the project to the same level that we are with this particular developer. The other thing that we do a lot of is working across the U.S. with our peers. We've set up an innovative capture group that consists of several DOTs, industry, and private organizations that basically we provide focus and lessons learned, what worked and didn't work for them, and we tweak our future procurements, our contracts accordingly. So some of the things that we picked up from those discussions that kind of go above and beyond what we do is environmental flexibility. What I was talking about flipping an interchange, taking and putting one road above the other. Well, that's easy to say, but what environmental impact does that have? Probably pretty significant. You may have to go back for a reevaluation if you're going to actually do that. So trying to build into our environmental documents the flexibility to allow people to actually flip those, do things like that, is critical. Sometimes we over-mitigate. If we're going to impact 100 acres of wetlands, sometimes we'll go in and say, well, we think we're only going to impact 100, but Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, we want to pay for impacting 120 acres so we can do more impact if we need to. So we don't have to come back to you. And you could say, well, you got to pay for that. Yeah, you do. But if I can get an ATC that maybe saves me $10 million, I just paid for that extra $100,000 of mitigation that I put into that bank. So thinking ahead. Right-of-way credits. We started doing this on the Grand Parkway project in Houston. Basically what we said is that when you do your proposal, kind of like the A plus B scenario I described earlier, well, if you can miss a right-of-way parcel or miss a commercial billboard or a cell tower, that's worth something to us. And if you can tweak your design to maybe do a cantilever section or put some walls in to avoid getting into that parcel, that's worth real money. So how do we encourage that? How do we account for that? And that's, we introduced that concept, and again, by saying, you know, if you can miss a parcel very similar to A plus B on schedules, we'll credit you with that. Well, we think we might have paid for that parcel. Well, you know, a billboard typically costs us $1 million to locate. So if we can avoid 1 or 2 billboard relocations, it goes a long way. And if you've driven down 35W in Fort Worth, there's 16 or 17 of them. I can't count how many there are. One of the things that we've done on projects is typically we set out a financial curve, a maximum payment curve, if you will. In other words, we tell the contractor, over the life of this project, we're only going to pay you up to this amount every month. What that does is it doesn't allow them to front-end load the project necessarily. We try to be, you know, take into account things like mobilization and such, but pretty much it allows them to provide us with some financial certainty of when we're going to have to pay them out. Well, a couple of projects we did was, you know, okay, the project schedule is, let's say, 30 months. Well, some of them actually have taken out their payment curves and their proposed payment curves. So as long as they're under our maximum payment curve, they submit their payment curve. And then what we end up doing is if they want less than our maximum payment curve, we pay them on their payment curve. Makes sense, right? So some of them submit their payment curves out way past the opening of the project, whether they just have cheaper money or whatever. But when we net present value those costs back, and we net present value all the financial costs back on these deals to day one, it looks pretty good on the spreadsheet. In other words, they can have more money, and you net present it, but it's spread out over a longer period of time. You bring it back, and it may end up being a lower proposal. We actually had one project that's how the contractor actually got selected. And a realistic procurement and ATC schedule. One of the, you know, when we start looking at asking for innovation and such, that's not a quick process. I mean, they have to go out and think about ideas. They have to design them to a certain degree. They bring them in, present them. We have to have time to review them and say, we agree, we don't. Typically, these procurements, for a design-build procurement, it takes us 6 to 9 months to get them to procure these projects. For a concession project, which is where we're talking about that long-term marriage, we typically take 12 to 18 months. But again, some of those concession projects are, you know, $2.4 billion, like the LBJ project here. So when you look at ATCs, I just wanted to flash some stuff up. But typically, as you can see, if you take a look at 6 of our recent projects, we had a total of 341 ATCs submitted, which the value of all those ATCs submitted was almost $3 billion. The ATCs that we actually accepted, and again, you know, you have 3 or 4 proposers on each project. So if we actually accepted 142 of those worth a little over $1 billion. Well, the winning proposers actually implemented 35 of those at $210 million. Now that was a real letdown for me. I mean, we went from $1 billion of acceptable ideals to only ultimately being able to incorporate $200 million. And part of our big push now is, well, let's go back and look at this $3 billion. What was wrong with those? Could we have actually accepted some of those and got that number up some more? Talk a little bit about projects. And the Horseshoe Project, probably a lot of you are familiar with that, have heard about that project. But we've incorporated into a design build, into a $700 million design build interchange project, basically, reconstruction of I-35. We've incorporated a $100 million Cavatralla Bridge, or actually there's two of them, one on each side. And to do that, you know, going back to, remember that risk matrix that I showed you? When we design something and give them a 100% design facility, what does that do? That means that we've accepted all the risk for design and other things. Well, blending that into a contract that is a design build contract that passes most of the risk for the rest of the project over was pretty tricky. But we'll have to wait and see how successful we were on that, because I think we just had the groundbreaking ceremony a couple, 3 months ago on that, so it's just getting started. LBJ project. We're actually going to open the first piece of LBJ to the east of the Dallas North Tollway by the end of the year. We had that project originally designed, and what we were submitting was a tunnel base, a tunnel project, or at least portions of it tunnel. Well, we allowed alternatives to come in, and one of the alternatives that we got is what's actually being constructed, and it's the cut and cantilever, the depressed section with the roadway cantilevered out over it was the design that we actually got. It's part of that innovation that we were talking about. The connector project, we've talked a little bit about that, but one of the things we did on that project, which was really cool, maybe not so cool if you were a concessionaire, but we did what was called a BAFO. You know, we were trying to hone in on the project, best and final offers, what BAFO means. So we got to the end of the process, and then we said, you know, we don't like what we got. So we're going to change it up a little bit. So give us your best and final offer on this revised scope. We did that. I think we did a double BAFO on that one, which is something I don't advise. But one of the things we found was that although we couldn't afford them in that particular project, we got a lot of good prices on the options to finish out the project. So over the last 3 years, 4 years, however long that project's been going on, we've been adding those pieces back in a piece at a time until we ultimately got almost 100% of the original scope back in. So we had them price out all of those options, and then we've worked with them to account for inflation and other factors to actually use those prices as the basis for issuing a change order to actually add a lot of that work back in. The North Tarrant Expressway, that was a really unique project. We did, we actually competitively procured a much larger project, but we only had money for a small project. You say small, I think it's $1.4 billion. But it was the segments that are presently under construction, what we affectionately call segment 1 and 2W. And those projects were basically, you know, there's 2E, there's 3, A, B, and C, and there's 4. So we have a lot more options that we could add into that project if we could find the money. Well, probably what we won't do that again, because on that scale, we negotiated basically for a billion, actually it's $1.4 billion contract to add the 35W piece through Fort Worth in. So not that we didn't have the ability to negotiate that, but it took us almost 2 years to negotiate that, which we could have easily gone through a procurement and maybe brought somebody else on in a much more competitive manner. It's one of those things that we probably won't do again. So with that, you know, I thought I'd finish up with this, this slide. Measure of success, from our perspective, ahead of schedule, under budget, and you got to have a little fun along the way, right? So right before we opened the 130 project down in Texas, the one with the 85 mile speed, the black Cadillac there ran 220.5 miles an hour on that project. Just to show that we could still capture their license plate when they went under the toll gantry. And he was straddling lanes. But I guess at 200 and something miles an hour, you can do that, right? So, anyway, with that, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to try to field them.
How many project managers, program managers do you have in your organization?
Oh, that's a great question. We have, the way we break the organization up, our project managers, this part of TXDOT is pretty much all consultant driven. So my team that runs these 20 plus projects is only about 60 plus people. So of those 60 plus people, senior project managers, I have one for each major, one for Dallas, Fort Worth, one for Houston, and then one for the rest of Texas. And then each of them, we assign a project manager, a single project manager per project, and they have some ancillary staff under them, but usually no more than about 5 TXDOT people per project.
Do you require certification?
No, we do not. We require PEs, though. How's that? Yes, sir.
Your P3 project is very similar to what we call build, operate, and transfer.
Call what?
Build, operate, and transfer.
Right.
So how long is usually the concession? Is it like a 10-year before they give it to you? And typically, how much fee do the participants get? Is it 1% of your revenue? Or
I'm sorry.
how much fee or profit do they get out of the concession?
Okay.
Thanks.
On the first off, the duration of the deals. If we do a design, build, operate, maintain, those typically run about 15 years. If we could do an availability payment deal, those typically run 25 to 35 years. The concession deals typically run closer to 50 years. One of the things that we do as far as the return on investment, the ROI, on a concession deal, those are the high-risk ones because they're taking revenue risk. They'll run, depending upon how they bid the project, somewhere between 12 and 15%. And again, that's primarily on their equity portion. So there's lots of funding mechanisms, but usually about a third to half of the project is developer equity on those deals. So the other really cool thing about the 130 project, by the way, is not only did they build the project, deliver the project, they also paid us $130 million to do it. So we didn't put a nickel into that project. So that was pretty cool. So, yes, ma'am.
What's your chief solution for the strategy that you outlined, or the problem that you outlined at the beginning of your discussion when you were talking about the additional $5 million? What's the chief solution you guys are chasing?
Talk really nice to the legislators. All of our funding has to come through the legislature, so legislative. As most of you probably heard during this last legislative session, they worked really hard to try to get us some extra money because they recognized the train wreck that's going to be happening. So that their ideal was to take part of the oil and gas revenues, which is building the rainy day fund, the strategic reserve fund, and use that to put about $1 billion extra. Now that gets us a part of the way there, but not, that's still not the extra $4 million. That gets us $1 million there. So the downside about that, and they did a great job of getting us that that additional $1 billion is, I think it's, somebody told me it was the largest, would be the largest increase in funding that TXDOT has ever seen. I'm not sure about that, but the thing about it is it doesn't go to the voters. It has to go as a constitutional amendment, and it won't go to the voters until November of 14. Again, think about that factory and that pipeline. I mean, if we get the money in 14, it probably doesn't start showing up for a number of years later.
Question is, two questions actually. On the one where you've got the vendor or the contractor sharing revenues, can you describe how they get their revenue back on all the money that they've spent? And then the other question is, how do you keep your stakeholders informed of your project throughout the project?
That's a great question. Actually, I'm going to start with the last question first. Stakeholder involvement, stakeholder education is the most critical thing there is to the success of one of these projects. If we can't get the stakeholders to support the projects, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to be miserable to build. Last legislature in 2011, the legislature implemented what is called a 1420 committee. It's a local stakeholder committee. So before we go do one of these projects, we have to bring elected officials together, and there's, I won't bore you with the details of it, but anyway, they have to come together and say, we're good with you guys building this project using a concession or a design build. So the stakeholder involvement is critical. And it's one of the things that we're getting better at over the years. We haven't always done really well. Used to in TXDOT back in 2000, when I first started working with TXDOT, you would come in and our idea of public involvement, stakeholder involvement, was we had 2 meetings during the environmental process about 5 years ago. That was it. We're going to build what we're going to build. Now we bring in working groups, advisory committees. We sit down and we formulate what the project's looking like, what the project should look like, what are the concerns of the community, how can we address those, and then, and after we have that information, we start the environmental documents and build all that into the environmental documents. One thing you have to remember in that 5 to even on the accelerated schedule on a 7 to 10 year project, most if we do a project along LBJ or 35, most of those commercial buildings have 3 to 5 year leases. So when we go in and start doing those projects, we can be talking to one set of tenants about what's going to happen, but by the time we get there and actually start constructing, those guys are gone. People are moving into the state at 1,000 people a day. So what we end up with is when we actually start building projects, well, heck, we weren't here for when you had all those conversations 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So what we found is we've got to keep talking, and we're doing a better job of that. All of those contracts have key public outreach components to them. Plus, we have done a much more aggressive job of internally continuing to reach out to our projects. Tony heads up our public outreach for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Does a great job of keeping the public informed. I was kidding him on the way over here that his job's really becoming a party planner job. I mean, we're either having a groundbreaking or we're opening something. So anyway.
This is more of a North Texas question than a PM question. So a lot of the construction here in Dallas has been toll roads.
Uh-huh.
Did the toll roads ever get paid for? I mean,
about the time you have to rebuild them and add more lanes, yeah. So then do you use the toll revenue to rebuild them, basically? Typically on the toll roads, the financial plans on those it takes about 30 years to pay them off. Well, the life of a project is probably that 20 to 30-year time frame before you have to start doing major reconstruction on it. Plus then, you probably want to add a new lane here or there or fix a choke point or something. So theoretically, yes. You pay them off, but then you've got to look at redoing them. So,
given that these projects are long-lived, right, and all the projections are done initially, has there been any analysis post-implementation, perhaps over a period of time, to evaluate the return on investment, profitability, so with a view to perhaps helping the public get better return?
well, there's been a number of, to answer your question, there is really no history more than 3-4 years old in the U.S. of how they operate. So you have to look to overseas, to Venezuela, Argentina, Spain, France, some of Portugal, and see how they've done over there. And again, some of them have been very successful, others have not. The 130 project. In the press, there's been a lot of discussion on the 130 is not meeting its revenue expectations. Well, okay, but we still have a great road that you can drive 85 miles an hour on, and the firm that built it, the European firm that built it, it's not going to pick it up and take it back to Europe with them if they close their doors. So from our perspective, from the state's perspective, from the owner's perspective, do I really care? They paid me $130 million to do it. I've got, there's criteria that says they can never raise the toll rate above a certain level. And if they don't get the development down there, if they don't get the traffic, it's kind of flip it, but do we really care?
The reason why I asked that, and one reason why it's important, right, is so say the contractor total cost out of pocket is, say, $5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what period of time they have to collect based on the concession agreement.
Right.
Has anyone tracked to see how much revenue or how much profitability they got over the period? Because if they ultimately got $8 billion over the period, then their profitability is $4 billion,
Mm-hmm.
which means they got a lot more. But with understanding that information, the city or the public can then renegotiate in future projects a better deal,
Yep.
factoring in population growth, people coming in, and so the city gets a lot more money to do more projects.
Yep. There is always that risk, if you will, that a road could be extremely profitable and there could be a windfall. But on the other hand, there's also the risk that if you would have never built that road, would development have come? Would you have had all those growth factors that drove all that development around the city and increased the needs around the city for those other projects? You can chase your tail all day on it. And the one thing I'll say is, we employ some very smart people from overseas to help us with those analysis. So that, and we do, on all of these procurements, we do detailed model runs and looking at that so that we are very, very assured that we're getting the best deal possible. But it comes back to the public sector is taking a risk. If those revenues aren't there, that ROI might be zero. But then again, it might be 18% at some point in time. But we got a facility that we needed that we could not have afforded to build, or it would have been delayed 20 years if we would have waited. So you kind of got to do that political math, and it's not always easy to come up with the right political answer there. But it is a way that we've been progressing. I would love to have an extra $4 or $5 billion a year, not have to do these deals. But unless the legislature, the governor see fit to give us the additional funds, this is a way of delivering the projects. This is a way of rebuilding 35. This is a way of rebuilding 183. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. So,
One more question.
This may be a two-part question. You talked about design build. If I understood that correctly, you were saying that they're designing while they're building. Did I get that right?
that's correct. Usually, the final design plans are the as-built that we get at the end of the job.
Can you talk more about that and how the risk management goes for that? That as they're building, if they're building something now and the later design could prove that what they built is not quite right, how do you do the risk management and kind of manage that planning while you're building?
Well, and I, little facetious, it's probably better to say, you know, we're going to design, first off, we're going to come up with the overall plan, the geometrics of the project, before they can move forward on it. And they've got to know what they're going to design to, what it's going to look like. Secondly, as they're progressing the project, we do over-the-shoulder reviews, and we do approve the design at certain points. So instead of doing one design package for the entire project, we may get 1,000 design packages along the way in bits and pieces. So before they start building something, they have a final design on it. But we like to joke that it's so fluid that we don't actually see everything together till closer to the end of the project.
Right, so how do you manage the risk that each of the individual pieces work together?
Well, first off, they're responsible for that risk. So we've pushed that risk to them. It hasn't been an issue. And in a couple of cases where they found, oops, we put the bridge footing in the wrong place, they've come back and either torn it out and put it back in or in the right place, or they've redesigned their whole structure to work around where they actually put it in the first place. So, I mean, but that gave them the opportunity to do that. So.
Okay, Russell, we greatly appreciate
Sure.
you coming down. A couple things struck me. I don't know about what struck you folks out there, but one, this is big business. Two, these are big projects. Three, how would you like to be responsible for projects that put a product out in the Texas weather 24/7, year after year after year? It's used by millions of people every day. And the bad, scary part is they know where to find you. So, Russell,
Especially the elected officials.
we appreciate it very
Yeah,
much.
thank
And,
you.
if push comes to shove and you get home in the evening, there's something you can put your tranquilizer in. All right?
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.